Tonight and it's morning in Australia, I'm speaking with Travis Beinke, who's the CEO of Australian Rare Earths, a very interesting deposit in Australia. Good morning or good evening, as the case may be, Travis.
Hey Jack, how you going? Thank you very much for having me. Really appreciate it.
You have what to me is an extremely interesting project because you have identified it as an ionic adsorption clay, and my experience with those deposits are that they were only in Southeast Asia. Okay, so and Brazil, as it happens. So this is the very first one I'm hearing about in Australia, and I'd like you to tell us a little bit about it because this is not something that most investors understand, this type of deposit, and it is very important at this point in time that we have deposits like this brought into production which are not in China.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Yeah. So the deposit was discovered back in 2020, and we spent the last 5 years really trying to unpack and understand the best way to develop the project. So it is an ionic clay deposit in South Australia, in the southeast of South Australia. It's not. It has the history of it isn't one that is what you would normally see in that traditional weathering process where you have that formation of those ionic clay deposit. It has been, the rare earths have moved in solution from a long way away from the from the source rock and come in contact with a limestone base, which has then caused the reaction for the rare earths to drop out into the clay that sits above this limestone base. So it's a little bit different the way the clay was mineralized. But the beauty of having a portion of the deposit that is an ionic adsorption deposit, it certainly means that the ease of recovery and flow sheet complexity or lack of complexity in the way that we're looking at developing the project means that we can develop these lower grade clay deposits that have a very good suite of the full rare earth element suite.
What rare earths are you targeting to recover from your deposit? Which rare earths?
Yeah, yeah. So we're looking at producing a mixed rare earth oxide that will then sell to separators for further separation into individual oxides. But the rare earth assemblage of our deposit, we run at about 23% NdPr of TREO and another 3% DyTb of the heavies. So 25% magnet component. And we're also well enriched with some of these other elements that we're seeing become, I guess, more in focus in the West as China has put their export controls on yttrium, samarium, gadolinium, and lutetium, and we've got a really nice assemblage of those elements as well.
Have you got any radioactive content in this material?
Yeah, so the deposit itself has a really great starting point from a uranium and thorium perspective, very low single digit type ppm. Obviously, it can concentrate up throughout the process, but what we've seen in our test work today, we're pretty confident that we've got a product that will be well and truly in customers' minds as far as clean, high quality products.
And by what process are you planning to extract the rare earths from the clay?
Yeah, so we're taking a slightly different route than most clay deposits. So we're going to be extracting the rare earths via a heap leach rather than in tanks. So what that means is that we can drive a lot of the capital cost out of the project by going heap leach, because once the alternate route, putting clay into a slurry, extracting rare earths, you then need to dewater those clays. And what we found is that is incredibly capital and energy intensive. And so by going down the heap leach route, we can remove all of that additional capital, whilst we have seen recoveries as good as, or if not better than what we saw in our tank leach test work. So we'll be extracting via a heap leach, and then a couple of precipitation steps to clean up the product into a mixed rare earth oxide.
The issue around the world with processing ionic adsorption clays is, what do you do at the end of the process? Is the clay material back to where it was, minus the rare earths?
Yeah, so what we're intending to do is a rapid and progressive rehabilitation of the landscape. We're in an agricultural setting, so we want to be able to return the land to our farmers in as good a state, if not better than what it was, particularly in the soils that are important to them. As far as the clay goes itself, yeah, a simple wash and neutralization step and then a draining step on the heaps will allow us to return the clay in a safe, stable, and non-polluting state, for which will be, obviously super important from a environmental perspective and from a regulatory perspective.
Well, what's your timetable for going into production now?
Yeah, so in our pre-feasibility study that we released last week, which shows a pretty robust project, the timeline we see for first production is 2029. So we've made some really good progress over the last 2 or 3 years in getting the project to this state, and we're really well positioned to continue through the next phase of study. We're about to commence a pilot plant with ANSTO here in Australia, and then we'll also in parallel be running through our regulatory approval process. So we feel like first production by 2029 is achievable, and certainly at a time where there's customers that are looking for third-party feedstock like our mixed rare earth oxide within that time horizon.
What's your target production tonnage?
Yeah, so we'll produce around 1,860 tonne of mixed rare earth oxide per year. And I guess for the key rare earth elements that will be contained within that mixed rare earth oxide, that will allow us to produce around 435 tonnes of NdPr, around just under 60 tonnes of dysprosium and terbium combined, around 240 tonnes of yttrium, 70 tonnes of samarium, and same with gadolinium. So quite a reasonable assemblage within that mixed rare earth oxide.
I've only known of one other company that was looking for this type of formation in Australia. I don't know if they ever found it. And you said you came across this formation in 2020, did you say?
Yeah, that's right. So one of the co-founders of the company was actually studying a PhD paper and uncovered some elevated rare earth elements within some of the work that the PhD student had done, and went to the core library here in South Australia, accessed some material, had some initial test work done, and pegged the ground and started drilling some holes. So yeah, it's been a pretty rapid sort of 5 or 6 years as we've looked to define a large resource, but also go through all the test work to develop a project to this point.
My experience of life is that you usually don't find things where you think they are, and they.
That's right. He wasn't even looking for rare earths; he was looking for something else. So,
Yes.
yeah.
This is very interesting because I don't know if there's any other such project in Australia, but the only places that these projects are being worked right now are basically mainland China to some extent, and then Myanmar, which
Yes.
is basically under Chinese control and produces the overwhelming amount of the world's heavy rare earths. So this is a very welcome deposit, because where I've seen other ionic clay deposits that people are trying to put in production are in places that aren't so friendly to production, or not so friendly to Western nations. So I think that you are really onto something, and I'm going to really follow this one, because I didn't think there would be ionic clays in Australia. So
Yeah.
I read your website, which I encourage our viewers to do. because it's really fascinating, and I can tell you that I'm pleasantly surprised by what you found. And
Mm.
the issue I'm asking you, I don't, the issue I see is regulation, permitting, and getting along with the local agricultural people.
Yeah, see, Jack, I think you've hit some really good points there. If you look around the world, a project like this, in a tier one jurisdiction like Australia, when we talk to potential customers, what do they like about the project? It's obviously a jurisdiction, the rare earth assemblage with the heavies, but also that low capital risk approach and simple development approach that we're taking. I mean, we've only our capital cost to get into production's less than $180 million Australian. So it's a really low capital investment compared to many. One of the things that we also that leads into that tier one jurisdiction is the regulatory framework that we operate within. South Australia is a great mining state. Australia is a great mining country. So in the way that we've looked to develop the project, we have obviously been working within the regulations in mind. So we are very comfortable that we are going to be able to demonstrate to the regulators, our stakeholders, our local community members, that we can develop the project in a safe and a sustainable way. So we've got great confidence in that. We've been working with our local landowners from day one. The original team did a great job in establishing important relationships from day one in the local community. So we've had a range of community consultative committees and landowner reference groups throughout that time, so we can exchange information and make sure that we understand what's important to our landowners and our stakeholders in the region. So there's a lot of work that goes on in that space. That'll continue, but we feel really confident with the hard work that everyone's done to put ourselves in a great position as far as regulatory approval, but also community support.
If you can tell us, or if you will, have you had any inquiries from people who could take that mixed carbonate and refine it into separated individual rare earth oxides?
Yeah, so we have a non-binding MOU with Neo Performance Materials Tools for half of stage one production. They've been a shareholder since the IPO of the company and a great technical support as a junior like us has looked to develop a project, but more importantly, a product that can be sold into the market. So working with the Neo team's been a fantastic opportunity for us. So in addition to Neo, yes, we've had a number of early stage conversations with potential customers from right around the world, the US, here in Australia, but also into Europe and up into Asia. So now that we've released the pre-feasibility study and we're about to run a pilot plant where we'll then produce sufficient product samples to share with customers over the next 3 or 4 months. Our ability to start ramping up that engagement with potential customers is only going to increase. So we're certainly looking forward to that and encouraged with the early stage conversations we've had to date.
I have to tell you, I'm very impressed by the fact that Neo has invested in time and in your project, because you actually would produce exactly what they need.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we've had the opportunity to continue to share and challenge ourselves with Neo from all the technical work that's been done. So putting ourselves in a position where we think we can produce a product that the market and Neo will accept is absolutely critically important, and been a big value to our company working with Neo over the last 4 or 5 years.
Is it easy to get to the site you're on?
It is actually. So we are one of the great advantages for the project and why it is a lower capital cost project is it's not in remote Australia. It's about a 4-hour drive south of Adelaide. There's regional country towns, within 30 kilometres of the project site. So a ready-made workforce nearby, existing highways and roads established roads right into the project site. available water available, and access to ports relatively easily. So we have a lot of that, that non-process infrastructure available to us that you mightn't otherwise have in a remote mine site in the middle of Australia. So that's a big advantage.
Well, thank you very much. And we're all going to be watching this, but me in particular, because it's fascinating to see this type of project being developed outside of the control of China, which I think is extremely important.
Yeah, no, great. Thank you, Jack. Really appreciate
Thank
the
you.
opportunity.
I'll be looking forward to hearing about those test results from Anston. Thanks again.
Great. Thanks, Jack.